On vous attend à l'intérieur. We're waiting for you. Alors, bonjour tout le monde. C'est pas tout à fait tout le monde. We are still missing a couple of people. As a matter of fact, about 20 people from Mexico. They took this morning plane because there was a delay yesterday in Montreal, so they should be here shortly. But they've been traveling for 2 days, so we need a little rest. So welcome everybody. Yes. While this is going on, we're playing. Music. So when you hear that, it's time either to go or to come in. Okay? So we do that. Well, bienvenue encore. So, your host is Kiras. So, Kiras member. Ça va? Oh, c'est moi. Oh. Time. Task sharing. Okay, we are done with that. Okay. Centre de recherche et d'intervention sur la réussite scolaire. So we are your hosts here today. We have 9 members of KBSI here. We have a 10th one also. We have the associate for undergrad studies with us. So all these people are members of KBSI. It's a research center of about 40 researchers, multi-university, 7 universities are involved. Also, we have other co-organizers. Knowledge Building International, of course. We have seen it since the first slide. Marlene and Carl, welcome. You're president and co-president of, I don't know, what's your role, Carl? No? Treasurer?
Secretary for
So, okay. For Knowledge Building International, yeah. And, well, Laval University is part of it. IKIT, we know IKIT, Institute for Knowledge, Innovation and Technology. We have École Réseau, the remote network school, as co-organizer. We have CFIO, who is behind the remote network schools. It's a knowledge transfer organization in Quebec. We have the Ministry of Education, Leisure and Sport, and we have TAC. TAC is our little team. But before I told you about TAC, I want our Dean of Education to be interviewed. So are you here, Thomas?
I'm here.
Okay. He knows the questions. I don't know the answers. But I'll stick with the questions because otherwise, you know, I may just invent some new ones. Okay. So, Carla, would you characterize our university's campus with 3 words beginning by an S, in French and in English? You may help here.
I will improvise.
You will?
Well, obviously there's science, something that's very dear to our rector, sustainability. Sagesse, and one of Thérèse's favorite words, well, synchronicity, and also synergy. That's her favorite word. I know that. Your favorite concept, I should say.
Okay, so what's the next question for you? Oh, yeah, I have it, okay. Everybody will hear me. Do you believe in collaborative learning?
I feel like I'm an Oprah. Well, it's such an obvious question to me because I've always been an avid reader of Vygotsky. René. Et Piaget aussi. Collaborative learning is a concept that's always been dear to me. I'm interested in everything that has to do with it in the classroom and in student learning mainly. So for me, this event is something very special to me, and welcome all to this wonderful event.
Do you believe in computer-supported collaborative learning?
I've actually been part of a few conferences of CSCL, and of course, for me, the tool itself is something so powerful. We're in the 21st century, almost like 20, that's because of my age. And I think anything that has to do with it, I was very interested in the 70s and in the 80s in innovations. And for me, innovation in the 21st century has to go through computer-supported learning. And like I said earlier, anything that has to do with it, I would strongly support. This event is something very special to me. Thérèse has done tremendous work, and just in case we forget her contribution to this event. Thérèse has an amazing energy. No. Let me go on. I've known Thérèse for about 35 years. I think she has more energy now I knew her at the time.
Do you believe in classroom-based knowledge building?
Absolutely. One is the consequence of the corollary of the other one. It's been through the work actually of Dr. Berider and Dr. Scaramelia. It's been promoted, and it's something that the future is there. And I think the partnership you have with the school system and the universities will nurture this notion in the years to come. And that's where innovation takes place.
Now your turn with a question. To me,
Well, what does ICT brings to the classroom and student learning? These are such obvious questions.
well, short answer. Short answer is
Maybe long too.
no. We don't have time for that. We can have kids do with ICT what they could not do otherwise. This is my wish. Often they do with ICT what they can do anyway, without it. But to do the things they could not do without the use of ICT, and here there are so many ICTs, but let's look at the upper ladder ones. That's my short answer. With regard to student learning, I think we will all have to address that this week. What does ICT? What do ICT bring to student learning? And we are here for that, Fiona. So we may have a different answer for you on Friday morning.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Please have fun while thinking.
Okay, so TAC. Here's the team we have been preparing. See, here we go. Well, they just only one, huh? Okay. And if you see this, everybody in the team can help you. If you see this picture. Okay. We have about 25 of them, so you should be able to get some help for anything. Remote network schools, also as a co-organizer. In French, école en réseau, collaborative platforms. So this is where it all started in 2002, when the deputy minister at the time asked us, what can ICT do for small rural remote schools? Then we came up with a model, a first model. That was a problem. We saw a window of opportunity, because on the francophone side, in case you haven't noticed, you are on a francophone campus, and 80% of the people are speaking French here. Teachers did not want a single online course before 16 years old. On the Anglophone side, they already had some online courses, but the Francophones one did not want that. Because in those small schools, you only have 2 or 3 teachers. You were afraid you would lose a teacher. You could not do all that needed to be done. So this was our window of opportunity to come up with, okay, the model would be online written discourse and online broader discourse, supported by some telecollaborative tools, and one of them was Knowledge Farm. The other one was the video conferencing system. So basically, it was some foundation out of International Society for the Learning Sciences, computer-supported collaborative learning, and design-based research. That's the model behind the remote network school. Things we have been doing. For the kids to do that, we need a lot of professional development. At one point, we felt the need to move beyond our local boundaries. And we had some publicity. One complice at the time, Mireia Montane, who was organizing the Universal Forum of Culture in Barcelona, and we started working. Another complice was Nancy Love from Hong Kong. And in 2008, 2007, we had the first meeting during the Knowledge Building Summer Institute to start preparing knowledge building international project. So every year, there is some design going on. with the teachers, and Mireya has already put, with her team from Barcelona, they already put the proposal together for next year on smart schools. We'll see. Because up to now, we have been under the umbrella of sustainability issues. Our tomorrow's innovators will be with us till at 9:45. We'll be addressing that question. Of course, with questions that interest them, like fish extinction. So slowly, we have developed over the years, and we had colleagues from South America, more and more. So it has been pretty active this year. So the people we are waiting for, and the people from Mexico are already here. Who is from Mexico? You don't know? Who is everybody else? They are not all on the plane. We were told there were about 15 that were already arrived. Okay, so we have a whole group. How many are you supposed to be from Mexico? Combien, Angela? So Angela is probably with them right now. Okay. So we are missing some information, but it will come. Okay. Okay. So a little framework now. That's the only one slide at that kind of level. I'll leave all the other ones to Karen Morin after that. Okay, so we are borrowing from ends from here. Here we have activity theory. We have one activity system, here a school system, let's say. That's the S. Let's say we have a university activity system. Ooh. Those two are extremely difficult. And very often in the academia we forget that. We think that what we invent here in this system can just go in that one. Are we mistaken? Are we mistaken? But let's say that we have a potentially shared object. And let's say that this potentially shared object is classroom-based knowledge building, knowledge creation. How do we make that happen? Okay, let's start answering that. That's what we need. School, university, government partnerships. Now I need your help. How do we pronounce that? Let's go. It looks like it's from Asia somehow. So how would you pronounce it, Sam, in your language? Sun? Sun? Okay. How would we say it in our friends from South America? Fernando, how would you say that in Portuguese?
I don't know Portuguese, but Spanish would be sung.
Oh. Okay.
Sung.
Sung. It will be sung. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. In Western Canada, how would you pronounce it? West is Pasco starting with the Anglophone in Montreal. Okay. In Ontario. How would you pronounce it? Sun? Sun. Uh-huh. And in French, we don't want to say, but the closest would be son, because it's the influence we have from our colleagues who speak English, mainly. So a song is absolutely essential. For a long time, and you see a lot of reading in academia around school-university partnership. And Lieberman, for instance, has been writing a lot about networks and partnerships. The old school in the old days. But we cannot forget that. I think the research we have been doing for a number of years, this is extremely important. Extremely important. And if there was space here, we would need to add another activity system. And we see how those three are extremely different. They operate very, very differently. So how do we create connection? Here, can we get a potentially shared object? So that's one thing. So we have that, and then after that, I suggest we need principal co-design. It has to be co-design. We have courses, we have workshops, very important. But at one point, we have to be able to get into co-design, the co-design mode. Because the teachers who engage in this kind of innovation are the ones who are not followers. So one double one we have is that we invent stuff here, and we try to send that there. And the only one who can listen and do something about it are those who can invent. So there is a clash. There is a tension. And Sylvie, if you want to talk about activity theory, you can talk with this lady, Sylvie. She can tell you about those kind of tensions. It's happening. And unless we move beyond those tensions, well, we don't go any further. And we invent one new model after the other, but finally, we don't get to scale here. So this is the problem we are facing this week also. It has to be principle also. Otherwise, not enough. We can believe in agents. We need that. We need to tap into the agency of teachers and the agency of school principals. We need that absolutely. But then we need an object. Huh? We know it has to move in that direction if we share that. But we have to go through the school curriculum. So many teachers are saying we cannot use ICTs because the school curriculum won't allow it. I need all the time to do something else. And you need some elements in the school curriculum. Or you may transform the school curriculum. If you do that here, you go this way, you can have something. And we have the knowledge building principles that can help us with that a lot. And then you create. And this goes a long way back. You know, Marlene Scardamalia, if we go back to 1995, we had the Tele-Learning Network of Centers of Excellence. This is where we started our collaboration. Marlene was in charge of the research program, which had to do with K-12. And the whole curriculum was right into there. I was wondering, how come it's knowledge building and the curriculum? I didn't know at the time. It took me some time, Marlene. And I was in charge of the teacher education strand, the research strand for that. And well, slowly started to happen. It became real. So this can happen here. But it's not enough. We have to move further. I think one of the key elements of this framework, it has to be through an online platform. Verbal discourse, written discourse, vice versa. But it cannot be anyone. It cannot be the one that the technician prefers. Hello, Pascal. Do you have any problems with digital matters this week? Talk to Pascal. So it has to be a platform that the agents, the teachers, the students will own. This is extremely important. And this is how we can start bridging. We can start bridging, of course, at the university. We move back to our system here where I used to courses and workshops. These are our instruments. This is what we do. So it means that when we ask for innovation to this activity system here, that's a school, it means we have also to innovate. We cannot just stay there. It is there. We need that. We need that absolutely. But we need more than that. So where do we go? Where's my next page? Build it. Here we are. Okay, so it means researchers and teachers also need agency. It's not all on the teacher side. We cannot require agency here if we are not ourselves in an innovative mode. And it's right there. Okay, we go next. Almost finished complete. So in terms of the role of our activity system at the university, in the RNS we have made two big changes. We had to add just-in-time for intervention. Just-in-time intervention. We have a video conferencing room where there are people there from morning to the evening who can talk with whoever comes in one virtual room. So that's part of the innovation we have in the RNS. And also, we have an increasing number of researchers in the International Society for the Learning Sciences who have understood the importance of cyclical innovation. one cycle after another. Innovation doesn't come once. It's not a straight line. Circularity, a lot of it. And it takes many years. But we need that. Okay, knowledge building, international project was just about that. So you see those elements in it. And also, and this is where we want to go, we want more and more principal knowledge building know-how. This would be a new role in the school, providing we can do that. So that's our task for the year to come and the years to come. So it cannot be more simple than that. We are into complex questions. We are into a complex activity, different activity systems. This is what it's all about. Oh, this was not supposed to be there. Well, you can read that. It follows principal knowledge building know-how. This is what we can put in a collective repository. Slowly. What's happening? The best of what we achieve in one school. And those schools will become hubs of innovation. So, what we have in our own here in Quebec City and the province of Quebec, our own sound data extending to KBIP, we have at this moment different sites. A number of students, number of teachers, school principals, we have ministry personnel, we also have more ministry people too, we have grad students and university researchers. This is the scope of KBIP at this time. We need the teacher's voice. And Stefan is here, and Stefan has worked with teachers. How long did it take, Stefan, to create that?
8 months.
8 months? Okay. So sometimes you were the mentor, sometimes you were the scribe, and they came up with a book. So that's one piece we have in French right now, to have that. We also need to hear from students. So imagine that this here is in front of your classroom, or in front of you. I have one in front of my office door. We are a network classroom. So I don't know for how many years, but we have had those posters. We distribute about, I don't know how many, 150, 200 a year. Different classrooms having that. So every time the teacher comes in, every time the students come in, they may not see it at all, because after a while we don't see what's on the door, but it's there. It is there. So now let's move to our program for the week. So the program is here. You can have it online. We upgraded it a few times. I think it's okay now. Is it stable, Maureen? Maybe not.
Stable.
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 For the moment.
For an hour.
Yeah, and it is printed also. The only changes, they will be just-in-time changes, and they will be
No
online. But we will not. We move beyond that. This is the 39th draft. Okay, okay. So, what are we going to have this year? Okay, we have plenary sessions, number of them, and it will start at 10, and Carl will deliver the first one. We are doing some think tanks, and Marlene will be exercising our advanced organizational thinking around that. Huh? You do that, Maureen?
Something like that.
Uh-huh. Okay, okay. And we have 7 paper presentations. So some people have written long papers. Who are the people who have written long papers? We just want to see your face. Okay, so we have long papers, okay? And we have more long papers than that, so we must be missing a few people. Okay? So, short papers. Because we're so busy, we just wrote a few pages. Okay? Short papers? Yeah, plenty of short papers. We have also workshops. We have 7 workshops. You have 1. So what is it going to be about? You have the first one? Is it the first one you're having?
Maybe it's tomorrow. I'm planning to work on some features that are missing in the new knowledge forum, such as rise above and referencing, to get input from users for the design.
Okay. Another workshop? Yes, what up?
It's about knowledge-based analytics. So how do we develop more powerful analytics tool for next generation knowledge?
Other workshops? Yes.
Hi. Yes, we have a workshop, and good morning, everyone. We work together with the Ministry of Education. We work with Marlene University and also principal associations in Ontario. And we want to share what we're figuring out, learning about, and we want to get your good thinking as we move forward with the project that we're looking at, doing knowledge building, knowledge creation in the schools, in the boards, with the students, and with the principals. So it's kind of an interesting process that we have in place. And we know that we can learn from you, so we're excited to do so. Thank you.
Another workshop? Yes.
We'll be putting on the later for curriculum workshop. So we'll be talking about assessment tools and meaningful indicators that can inform the design of tools that can work with curriculum and technical benchmarks and evaluation. I think.
Anybody else doing a workshop? Yes.
Knowledge building in undergraduate education.
Don, did you raise your hand? You were looking at the program.
What I'm trying to organize is big data framework analytics workshop. That's workshop 5.
Okay. So see, we have a whole bunch of workshops. Are we missing one? Okay, we have 7. Yes. Okay. We are going to have a BCCI panel. So maybe some of you better check that. You may find your name on it. So Marlene, at this point, I will ask you to say a few words about it. The panel. What are you expecting from participants?
I'm going to say something about it when I talk.
You're coming?
Session.
Yeah. Are you? Oh, yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Even before. I'm slowing down here. And we are going to have some interactive and online sessions. Okay? We have colleagues from Hong Kong who will be online. We have an interactive session. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about the interactive session.
It's in design mode right now, and we're going to be sharing with our colleagues the work of Jean Regin, so he should really see it.
Okay.
So we're going to have an interactive session, the first time slot tomorrow morning, ideas for an upper software tool work-based knowledge forum to help students reflect on knowledge building and also assess knowledge building at the work time. So welcome to that session.
We have a poster session. We have about 12 posters. So in the program you see a bunch of them. And there is an issue with posters. And we eat at the same time. So it's always tricky. But we don't have enough space to provide a distinct activity for that. So somehow I think we need to find a way to eat and talk at the same time. We always do. But then to add also posters in front of us when we do that. And there's a lot of work being done on those posters, and I think it's important that tomorrow we eat the pizza tomorrow. That's traditional. We will not do without it. So, and then we have posters also. And we are going to have some online participation. So right now we have we are on web streaming. I did not give you the mic, present what you just said. I don't know if people understood the web streaming, but we have a number of people who want that. And we have offered that opportunity to the members. People who were there last year, or people who have their membership within KBI, and we have offered them the opportunity to listen. They have also an opportunity to write in the chat room. We are using Hangout for that. And also for the sessions where maybe a presentation from somebody at a distance, we are going to be using a video conferencing system, which is a KBSI video conferencing system. So we have voice on the platform. And we are going to have tomorrow's innovators. Tomorrow's innovators are going to work on Knowledge Round 4.8. You know, when I gave Christina Mel, who is running the show, the choice which KF to use, well, of course, she said, I'm not going to take any risk on this one. You know, I'm going to use the one I know, because we have been using the new KF here since January, but I was the one to use it with my students. So Christine was teaching a classroom organization and management course. She had over 125 students in it, and we used 4.8. So this is what would be happening. And if you want to join, you will be able to join. If you go on Knowledge Round 5, you will have the URL to reach the 4.8, where the students will be working. And of course, we have food, drink, city tour, and party, but we are going to wait for them. They are coming in 2 minutes, along with their kids. But let me show you that. We take a little advance. So this is the program that was shown to the parents. So we have a whole bunch of students coming from Mexico, and the other ones are coming from Quebec. So of course we needed to tell the parents, and this is only in French, you know. So don't feel bad about it, because most of what we have written is in English. So, but this was for the parents in Quebec. And in Mexico, they have different dynamics to create all of that. So we have a very extensive program all day, and I just want to be able to get the. Oh, okay. So this is the program they are going through this morning. Okay. So we are already here in the program. Yeah, they are coming. Okay. Yes. Are they coming? Okay, let's move ahead. Okay. So here's the knowledge form for 5.0. Maureen, are you going to talk about it?
No.
Later? Okay. So,
I'm just going to show how to get into the think tanks.
okay. Okay. So here's how you're going to enter that. So on your card, you have all that's needed. Okay, if you look at that, you will find the registration code. You will find the URL, how to get there. This year we use a KF that's right here. You have that. You have the registration code. And then when you enter, this is what you're going to see. Susanna, do you have any detail?
There is basically all the stuff that you have in your package, but it's electronically. So you have the program, the abstracts, the participants list, and the papers are also being added in a different view. That picture you have is not it's not the way it looks right now. Right now it has more stuff in it.
Oh, it has been reorganized?
Yeah. And
It's evolving.
yeah, and we hope that people will participate and will add notes, and so that it's, you know, very active during the conference.
Okay, okay. So this is what we're going to be using. So at this point, all the kids are supposed to come in. What's happening? Okay, okay, yes, we get the demonstrations. Perfect, Pascal. I like initiatives like that. Okay. One. Are they coming?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh,
Everything's great.
okay. That's what they did this morning?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Ah, wow.
Just in time thinking.
So we'll have a team translating.
Huh?
We'll have a translating team,
That's right. Okay.
translate the notes of the kids.
Yeah. So kids will be writing in their mother tongue, and then we have a team who will be translating for them. We do that often in KBIC.
So which language are you using? French or English or Spanish or what?
Spanish and French.
No English?
No. There are so many in English. Very good.
Oh my God.
I prefer Spanish and French. Very good. There are some in which language?
English.
We have some in English, of course, if they can, because this is in KBIP, they have to speak English at one point to understand one another. But, okay, they're still writing? They're supposed to be here. Well, we won't complain, huh?
Just now.
Huh? Yeah, a whole bunch of them. I coordinate 55 kids. You know.
Oh, they're here. I see.
Okay. So. They're coming? Okay. Okay. Yes. Okay. Oh. Okay. Oh, vous pouvez vous asseoir. Okay, so we have 10 minutes with them. Okay, we may ask questions. So you have started already, Christine?
Yes. So we have chose. We didn't chose because we have two groups this year. We will have the elementary groups. Can you raise your hand, les petits? Les petits, ceux qui représentent le primaire. Okay. And we have the tall group with the high school. No, it's not tall. The older group. Sorry. So we have the high school one, who for bigger groups. So can you raise your hand? Okay, so the elementary group will work about captivity and liberty of animals. So they have a lot of questions over there. And like, for example, you can show Benjamin one, the other one. So they have put a lot of questions in every note about that. They raise questions with some mistakes, but nice questions. So every children will throw their contributions in their native language and will translate all day long in Spanish, French, and English. So you can follow our work in the kiosk. And the oldest one, not the tallest one, but if they're tall, they will work more about the effect of humans in aquatic fauna, because today they're going to fish to see what are the impacts on fish, and they will study the fish. They will have texture, and they will go to boat and everything to understand what are the effects of humans. And tomorrow they are going, because in Quebec City we have lost the zoo, and a lot of people are trying to get a new zoo, but the children are asking themselves what are the animals feeling about living in captivity. So this is the young one who will work on those questions. And they have raised a lot of questions about extinction animal with captivity and liberty. And are they less active when they're in captivity and everything. So this morning they really have put their questions on kiosks. They're going to the field trip, so to collect data today and tomorrow. They are going to the aquarium, so they have a visit only for them about everything, how it works, the aquarium, and in the afternoon they will go to some animal show with their guide. We have the teachers for this year. Mexican teachers who will come with us, and we also have graduate students who all have a degree in teaching that will guide the students through their knowledge building principles and knowledge building teaching, knowledge building learning through the 4 days. So, and on Friday we will present you our process, what we have done all the week long.
Alors, vous allez revenir vendredi. Super, super. We'll come back. I'll just say that in Spanish.
El viernes.
So one of the co-organizers is the Remote Network School Network. So we have 4 students from the Remote Network School. Their parents have daily the vacation, so they could be here. And they have been working on knowledge doing knowledge reading for a number of years, so they will mentor others. And we also have some students from Mexico who were involved last year and have been involved this year with the teachers, engaging, doing knowledge building, and also they will mentor the new ones. Everybody else is new to it. Okay, and they're coming from different backgrounds, and the challenge is, you know, the team we have, including the students who can be tutoring today, and the Mexican students on Tuesday for this week also, we'll see how we can go in a few days, in a few hours. And it's a large classroom, it's a large learning community. 56 now, huh?
57.
57, okay, we got 2 this morning.
Yeah, 2 5 years old. The oldest one wrote their note. They already have done that. So we have Dubai, who's 5, and Grace. Where are you, Grace? Maybe she's with her. No, she's there. So we have 5 years old.
On vous souhaite une très très belle journée. Hein? Prenez le bus, vous en allez à la base de plein air. C'est magnifique. Et puis, posez toutes les questions que vous avez, prenez des notes. Hein? Et on revient ici. Demain, vous avez encore plein de belles choses. Et le vendredi, là, on va avoir très hâte de vous entendre.
Pásenla muy bien, tomen notas, van a ir a una zona en el aire, afuera, así que, ¿está bonito? Al aire libre, sí, al aire libre, así que tomen nota, diviértanse mucho. Y mañana también hay actividades y el viernes los esperamos aquí con otra participación.
Merci Marie-Claude. Thank you Marie-Claude. She didn't know she would have to do that. Okay, so bus is waiting for you.
Alors,
Christine.
OK, alors on va aller, les petits, vous allez aller par là, rejoindre Caroline et Stéphanie. Les grands, vous allez faire ici, vos enseignants vont être là. The tallest one, oldest, my Mexican team, over here. Avez-vous les filles? Parfait.
You already what's happening with the other kids who have not arrived yet. They are cars that will take them all over the place, so they will join as soon as they get here. Okay, well, it's 10 o'clock sharp, and it's time to hear from Carl.
We're coming for a coffee break.
Oh, coffee break already? Okay, coffee break, okay. And then you'll hear the music come back, okay? generate issues that are interaction. So like exactly. So like think about what
Yeah, you need different things. Oh, not right now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the building platform the tool. So if you don't have the blank space, so that yeah, so much. And also, yeah, that's really It doesn't open, and that fixing the field is
Yeah, and this is private. First time here in the community, so everybody in. That's the way it works. If you're a walker and you like to walk to her, then you have a better chance to talk to her.
Okay, so you'll bring up the full screen.
Je vais mettre des haut-parleurs dehors. Je vais mettre des haut-parleurs dans la salle d'autre part. Je vais apporter quelque chose quand même.
Okay, everybody ready? Okay, so it's improvised, but I'm very pleased to introduce you to Mr. Berreiter presentation. So to you, Mr. Berreiter.
This is the 18th Summer Institute. Some of you were mere children. Bodon Chen, our most recent PhD, remarked the other day he just realized that Cecil is older than he is. So this has been going on quite a while. Quite a strong community has formed around knowledge building, and these annual meetings have, I think, serve two main purposes. One, of course, is the networking. A lot of connections, projects have been formed. The other thing is exchange of ideas, and putting those two together, the organizational stuff and the idea stuff, has always been something of a challenge. But there's always been some kind of idea-based theme. More than the usual amount of organizing, getting things going is slated for this meeting. But I have the pleasure of talking more about the idea part. And I'll try to connect it some to the initiatives that are taking shape here. The open informational world is way familiar to everyone. But what it really amounts to, all of these ways of getting access to information and exchanging it, is that there are no longer any boundaries around the information that's usable in knowledge building and problem solving. There's now a superabundance of information, and that in itself raises new challenges. It's, of course, a variable and uncertain quality. We no longer rely so exclusively on well-authenticated textbooks and other sources. A weak point that may someday be solved is that all of this abundant information is basically indexed by topics, not purposes. Finding out something about the latest mousetrap is easy. Solving the problem of what to do about life is not. It's still difficult. The information isn't indexed according to problems or purposes. And all of this, of course, which is pervasive in society, contrasts with the relatively closed informational world of traditional education, where in the extreme form, especially in more remote or small schools, the teacher was almost the sole source, along with the textbook, of information. And that's just simply no longer the case. It opens up new opportunities, and there's a lot of talk about this. Opportunities for people to take charge of their own learning, to become creators rather than just acquirers of knowledge, and pursuing goals that were previously accessible only to experts. A dramatic example is sophisticated healthcare. Doctors are beginning to adjust to the fact that many of their patients come in knowing more about their particular ailment than the doctor does. Instead of being threatened and trying to put that down, doctors are learning to take advantage of it. And of course, more learning now can go on outside formal institutions. But there are new challenges, or to put it differently, downsides to the new information. There are problems of course, of quality of information. And there's a lot of talk about that. Assessing the relevance of information now becomes somewhat more problematic. But the part I want to dwell on more is that the task of processing information into knowledge falls more and more to the user, rather than being somehow pre-digested for the user. The other phenomenon that we can see all around us, and it's most dramatically represented in Twitter, is this notion that the information is coming in smaller pieces than it used to. So it's like the things you get at IKEA. There's some assembly required, and you may often find that. Where does this group go? Alan Liu, who's an English professor, actually, coined the term translation. Now, he used it to refer to a whole range of adaptations of literacy to the new information environments. And the thing that we found most intriguing in his treatment is that he looks at what is lost as well as what is gained. And in a word, what Liu finds is lost is the book. Now, that's not literally true, but he uses the word book to represent all kinds of long forms of shared attention, as he calls them. In contrast to the shorter forms, a big book is a longer form of sustained attention than almost anything else. Longer than movies, longer than plays, longer than art objects, and so on. And if that kind of long form of attention is lost, there can be real difficulties arising from it. And so a conference that Marlene and Therese and I attended in Cachan, which is a suburb of Paris, it focused on educational implications of transliteracy. And in those terms, transliteracy is a competence that's needed and that can be developed. It includes multiliteracy, which may already be familiar to many of you. Multiliteracy is the ability to read, write, and interact across the whole range of platforms, tools, expressive and information media. Transliteracy assumes all of this, but on top of it, it layers knowledge skills. Knowledge skills that enable the information consumer, if you will, to build coherent knowledge out of incoherent bits and pieces. That, in a nutshell, is it. I want to give you a very mundane example that illustrates the basic idea. This is what I can see as I look out the window of my office. 3 sons. And frequently, there's a lot of parking on that street, and I'll see somebody staring at those and then wandering off. to return an hour later to get a $32 parking ticket. What's the problem? Well, one of the signs has essential information, except you really don't need to read it, because it just says which side of the street you can park on. And all you do is look up and down, see which side everybody else parks on, and take your chances. But this is the sign that leads people astray. 1 hour parking. I have an hour to park. Well, no, you don't. Because it says at other times. Now, what in the world does that mean? There's no way to know what that means because you have to integrate it with this sign. This sign that says you can't park at all without a permit except during this time. So it's a pretty elementary kind of putting information together, and yet it proves to be an insurmountable challenge for many, I think, otherwise intelligent people. Here's the kind of conversation that goes on. I've learned not to do this anymore. It doesn't actually make friends. But, you know, the person parked. See, it says 1 hour parking, and I'm parked on the right side of the street, and yet they gave me a $32. But the sign says no parking from 12 or 1 a.m. to 7 p.m. Yeah, but here it says 1 hour parking, and I haven't been parked an hour and drives away, you know, unfairly treated. How do we explain something like that? Well, even with normal working memory limitations, which may restrict us to about 4, maybe 6 at the outside pieces of information we can manipulate simultaneously. This only calls for 3. That should be within normal capacity. So that's not an adequate explanation. I won't go into schema theory because, well, either you know what it is or you don't, because I'm not going to tell you, but people have schemas in which they put new information. And if your schema doesn't have the necessary slot, you don't have any place to park the information and work with it. And so that could be an explanation. But another one that I sort of like is effort minimizing strategy that Anne Brown, with reference to children's reading, called copy delete. And essentially it means you read things one statement at a time and evaluate them separately. So you either keep it or throw it out, depending on its intrinsic seeming importance. And so when you come upon the at other times, you throw that out rather than connecting it. That's something elementary school children are found to do very commonly, but we can see evidence of adults doing it. And I have the impression that a lot of the highly thoughtful and intelligent adults who read emails from me read that way. They pick up a few keywords and infer the rest. And sometimes it works, but other times it doesn't. Important here is that you never find these victims of the parking sign saying, well, I just can't understand it. No, they have no impression of not understanding. When we know we didn't understand something that we're reading, we have a lot of strategies available that we can bring to bear, but you have to know you're in trouble. They're not things you do with every sentence you read, because most of our reading is totally effortless. It's only when we recognize that more is required. And all of this applies on a much larger scale to the failures of transliterate comprehension. Working memory limitations are real in this case. Often there's simply more information to integrate than our working memory can handle. We do apply schemas or scripts that oversimplify, partly out of necessity, partly because we simply don't have the M capacity, as far as Pascal Leone calls it, or the working memory capacity to hold all these things and work with them. And we sometimes do process single propositions or just keywords rather than constructing a coherent representation of the whole text. And we often fail to recognize comprehension failures. This adds up to the fact that transliteracy is difficult for humans. We're poorly equipped for integrating multiple pieces of information. And this is something that Herbert Simon was one of the first Nobel laureate in our area of occupation. So there's really no way around it. We're compelled to work with simplified models of the real world because virtually every problem we encounter is too complex for us. However, authors can help us by producing what Bonnie Armbruster called considerate text. And that's books and lectures in which connections are made explicit between the ideas. Her point, though, was that many school textbooks, in fact, on the whole, they are not considerate texts. In fact, to win the race for the best readability scores, editors throw out the connected words and give a bunch of choppy sentences that are then difficult for the reader to put together. And although MOOCs are in some ways giving us some of the most considerate text that we've encountered, because so much work has gone into the preparation of the lectures, the lessons. Apart from them, considerate text is playing a declining role. Twitter is an example of this, Facebook, even Wikipedia, because again, rather than lengthy textbook type things that I'll put it all together, you have a short, relatively short article with a mess of links to other articles. And so the bottom line is you have to do the work now that in the old days an author would do for you. A considerate parking sign. See, things can be made easier by taking into account what's likely to happen. And this would do it, I think. Hit them right between the eyes with the fact that there's a problem. You cannot park on this side of the street and then look for exceptions and see whether any of them apply. Transliteracy, as far as I'm aware, is a pretty new concept in schooling. But it's not as if schools aren't doing anything that's relevant in this direction. They're moving to engage students with multiple forms and sources of information. Reading tests now frequently call on students to pull in information from more than one document. But for the most part, the focus is on how reliable is the information and getting it arranged according to a topic. The putting it together into coherent understandings remains largely the job of the teacher. So with the result that the students themselves get little experience in this serious task, converting fractured miscellaneous information into some kind of coherent knowledge. In progressive education these days, argumentation is a favorite, but it in turn favors weight of evidence, which I'll say more about later, as opposed to or distinct from knowledge integration and explanatory coherence. I want to illustrate this by pulling in a sample actual lesson from WISE, the web-based inquiry science environment unit on light. And I choose this examples from WISE because these are carefully crafted instructional sequences that do in fact call for integrating information. This one features multiple forms and sources of information. And it happens to bear on the question of, does light go on forever until it's absorbed, or does it die out as it gets farther away from the source? It's just it's a 1 week unit, so naturally it provides little time for coherence building. So I'm using it not to criticize it, but to illustrate the potential for a more sustained knowledge building effort. Just a couple of samples from what's actually an abundance of information that the unit provides. Picture a bicyclist at night. So you see light reflected versus light being absorbed. A picture of searchlight, where it sure looks like the light fades as it gets farther from the source. Then real data about light intensity measurements with reflectors, without, and so on. Some graphical information. As you can see, it's very rich in possibilities. And they get into what the Hubble telescope is telling us about light traveling in the distant universe. From the standpoint of transliteracy, however, there's some serious lacks there that I would suggest tend to be lacking in most curriculum materials in schools. Students do organize the information, but they don't integrate it. And what I mean by this is they put it together into categories, but building some kind of knowledge structure out of it is not what's called for. They argue on the basis of weight of evidence rather than explanatory coherence. Weight of evidence is weighing the evidence for and the evidence against some proposition, but it's not a simple count of number of pieces of evidence. The weighting is weighted as significant, but it's quite different from integrating again. In common law, as I've been informed, weight of evidence figures in judges' decisions on minor cases because it's quick. A judge in the traffic court doesn't want to hear 3 weeks of argument defense over a parking ticket, but wants to know what's the pro, what are the pros, what are the cons. So on the hypotheses about light, we basically get this sort of thing. Some evidence on the light dies outside, some evidence on the other side. The students debate it, which really is an issue of which pieces of evidence add up to the strongest, which is tip the balance one way or the other. That, of course, is not how scientists decide things like this. They want to weave it together into a coherent explanation. The aim for explanatory coherence, and this is an illustration from Paul Thagard, based on this, of the complex interactions among different propositions and facts, bearing on the question of do bacteria cause ulcers or is it excess acid? And that's an interesting case because medical science did a complete flip on that, having been firmly committed to the bacteria, or to the excess acid explanation. And, basically, the new piece of evidence was finding bacteria in the stomach that took the whole thing out. Physics of light, here's the kind of thing that would be a coherent representation of that. This isn't balancing one argument against another, it's putting it all together. Here's some smaller, this is a smaller section of the same figure. So it consists of a lot of propositions. Absorption of light is characteristic of most materials, and so on down. You can turn every one of those pairs into a sentence based on connections. There's technology, in fact, to support coherent explanation that's been tried with success in schools, convincing. Has students actually build those kinds of connections. The question I want to raise, though, is how does transliteracy relate to knowledge building? Marlene actually discussed this last year in the keynote, showing how knowledge building principles uphold transliteracy. And she also showed new knowledge form designs that will provide more support for it. There's a hope, for instance, that collaborative pursuit of understanding can at least partially overcome the limits of individual working memory capacity. We don't actually know that to be the case. It sounds reasonable, but it's the kind of thing that's really needs further exploration, research. Collaborative understanding simply is collaborative explanation building. Personal understanding is not simply explaining, but when you're doing it as a collective group, what we're really trying to do is to collaboratively explain something. And building and improving explanations is the major focus of knowledge building in education. So very much about transliteracy turns upon the ability of collaborative explanation building to cope with this problem of small pieces of not very closely related information. So we need to think of ways to sharpen the focus of knowledge building and transliteracy. Because it certainly didn't start out with that as a focus. It wasn't even a concept that was on the stage at that time. And we have to remember that knowledge building took shape in the more closed informational world. Before Google, Wikipedia, smartphones, and so on. Knowledge building teachers came into the classroom with an armful of magazines. That's what it was like in those days. So we do need to think, how's it different now? Nevertheless, though, user-generated content has always been central to knowledge and to the CSOL knowledge forum technologies. So Web 2.0 and this whole business of user-generated content was really anticipated in knowledge building from its earliest days. adapting to the open informational world, I wanted to emphasize, does not require it to become much more like Facebook or other new media. In fact, that could be the worst idea you might come up with. But it certainly doesn't follow necessarily. Though, if you look at the technology pep talks going on the web, one would get the impression that educational technology should be rebuilt to be more like Facebook. No, knowledge building's job is to integrate the varied information, including information that comes from places like Facebook or wherever, but it has a different job to do from the Facebook kind of job, the Twitter kind of job. Although it would take a while for me to justify it, it has quite a different job to do from Wikipedia job. So there are steps that can be taken. Need to ensure that rising above, which is an old standby of knowledge building videos, that it's understood to entail integration and coherence and not merely aggregating pieces of information. We need more than ever to treat theories as drivers of inquiry and not only as outcomes of inquiry. In any kind of model of an iterative process in knowledge building, theories are both. They result from inquiry and knowledge building, but they drive further cycles of it. And it might be helpful to us to think of knowledge building teams as enlarged brains with increased ability to hold multiple dimensions in mind. This may prove to be fancy, but it's probably worth holding as a working hypothesis that you can get a group of people functioning as a single gigantic brain in some sense. This calls for rather a different view of scientific method or any kind of knowledge building method. Here's actually one of the better models of the conventional view. And basically, you collect evidence, you produce hypotheses, which are generally predictions, and then you test them. And if predictions are turning out badly, you revise the hypothesis and so on, and go down, and eventually you come out with a scientific theory. Here's a more complete model, which is a little more like how it is in reality. I don't expect anybody to wade through that, but we can look at the progressive inquiry model of Kai-Hakaranians as represented somewhat differently by Toikana as a piece of that big picture. That again shows that it's not an assembly line way of arriving at knowledge. It has a lot of loops in it that eventually produce some kind of coherent result that gets summarized. And the finish usually does not mean that the knowledge has been arrived at.
There was an edge.
No. So, in conclusion, transliterative comprehension is a bigger challenge than I thought previously. What you're going to encounter in the program these next days are 4 think tanks being conducted. Marlene's going to explain this and give some better context for it. What I want to do here is to suggest that each of these think tanks, although it's likely to have multiple problems or goals, could do something to advance us toward having better ways of dealing with transliteracy. The first think tank on professional development, some relevant concerns there are raising awareness of the need for students to take on more responsibility. I think firmly if the idea is laid out, most teachers would readily accept that, oh yes, that is the way it's handled, the heading. But raising awareness is raising awareness that, hey, this is something that you need to do something about. And at the same time, develop teacher skills in guiding self-organizing knowledge processes. Hubs of innovation. Places where innovations are really being put into a workable form could be producing models for moving beyond question and answer inquiry to building complex explanations, because that's an essential part of the transliteracy challenge. We need a lot of experimentation with collaborative comprehension of difficult texts and other knowledge representations. They're all ones that impose real difficulties for the individual learner, but for collaborative making sense of these things could be successful. Find game simulations and other media that promote integrated knowledge building. And there's also building an ethos among the students, helping them to understand what's new and challenging in the open informational environment, and getting them fired up to deal with. Open source software and assessment. We need rise above supports that really encourage rising to higher levels rather than merely summarizing. And a tendency for students to use the rise above note as simply a summary of what's above. The idea has always been more than that, and it fits very nicely with the demands of transliteracy to work. The technology itself needs to do more to help bring that about. Enable promising ideas to rise to the top, but also allow for self-correction, because we may all think an idea is promising, but work with it for a while and it doesn't seem to lead anywhere. So there needs to be self-correction. Okay. Work on this. This is a really difficult challenge. To work on automated assessment of coherence, on constructive use of multiple sources, and on strength of explanation. There's helpful basic work available on all of those, but translating them into a support for knowledge building, big challenge. Hopefully, it will soon be possible to collect from live classrooms and live teachers, live students, real examples of transliteracy, explanatory coherence. we ought to be able to go beyond my traffic sign illustration of what it is to examples drawn from real classrooms. And Think Tank 4, which is concerned with collecting this kind of evidence of inventions, discoveries, and so on, and putting them in an accessible form could help do that. The idea is also to have a data repository serve as a basis for particularly graduate student research. So there's a need to configure databases to facilitate research on emerging trends, not only on standard issue questions of learning and motivation and so on, such as the ones that appear just developing. So there's a pedagogical challenge, a social innovation challenge. There are technology challenges, very deep ones, and assessment. And finally, there's the knowledge transfer challenge, which is how to inject into school life a fuller awareness of the new problems and challenges of the open information world. And with that, thank you.
We're going to take any questions.
Well, I don't know. I thought my time was up. We're going to have.
Is he going to take questions?
Yeah, we'll come to the think tank.
Well, while he's putting this on,
questions.
I'll ask. Does anyone want to ask questions? Okay, I think we're good.
So I really want to thank people. Hey, I haven't seen you. I really can't tell you how pleased I am to see you and how encouraging it is to set out new directions. I think lots of you know we've been consulting with you, visiting and talking, trying to figure out how to put a coherent enterprise together that can handle some of the big issues we're collectively dealing with. And we think we've finally come to a model that we hope will be workable, but there are also huge issues, so we really need your critical input. And so part of what I'm trying to frame here is the new knowledge building initiatives that are happening in your sites, which of course you'll be doing the workshops and will be at your presentations. News and introductions of some of those so people can collectively see what is going on, but also a sense of where we're headed and how we think this is going to fit together. So just to give a context, we've been talking a lot about a building cultural capacity for innovation initiative, which aims to go beyond a 21st century skills approach to the need of an inclusive knowledge society. So what we're, of course, always trying to deal with is the fact that it's an international design, research, and development effort that has people from ministries of education, principals, councils, business leaders, policy makers, engineers, so we practitioners, administrators. It's a very diverse community with many people having interests from very different perspectives. So the issue is, how do you create a coherent structure that holds this energy together and can continually benefit from it? I think all of us share this notion that whatever this enterprise is, it's got to be a research-intensive enterprise. That is, we're known because we make advances in education. We're known because we produce results that are measurable. We can actually keep those increasing on a steady basis. And I think if anything's gained us the place we have in the international world, it's our ability to keep those improvements moving. And the notion of knowledge for public good, that it's a fundamentally social issue, and that we ourselves have a responsibility that our innovations are open and free and in the world, and that we are open to all of the people to be connected on the same. At the same time, it's really hard to take small groups and stretch them this broadly. So how do you do that and do justice to the kinds of advances that we're trying to make? So just really kind of quick glimpse at these design challenges. We've actually been stating, which I think we all believe and we have some indications of, but not the large-scale data that we would need, that through knowledge building, you can get significant parallel advances in basics and advanced knowledge work across diverse student populations. So both the basics and the higher order in one package is, of course, one of our propositions. The notion also that all students can engage in sustained creative work with ideas. I think oftentimes we're relegated to the higher order thinking time in schools, or it's kind of, well, let's get started with the students who have greater capacity with this, which is really empathetic to the belief about how it is that we're to be moving forward. This notion that students can literally take collective responsibility for knowledge advancement, as Carl was saying, they can live in transliterate worlds. They can find that idea that doesn't fit really interesting and a clue to say, hey, we have to work harder. But in order for them to feel that collective responsibility, they need to experience life in worlds where there are difficulties. They need benchmarks, they can't succeed. We need to go to I. So the students themselves have to understand what it means to take collective responsibility, and then in turn, we're responsible for yearly measurable advances in knowledge practices. As we've been meeting with people internationally, just generally trying to figure out how to proceed, the contrasting beliefs that keep coming to us in states are this, that we need the basics before higher level work with ideas. I just came back from Chile, and it's just amazing. They so believe, would like to have students engaged in knowledge creation, but they're also dealing with massive international tests that keep having South America lower on the profile of what's happening on these international tests. And then there's this sense that our problem is not that we fear for the innovativeness of our students' ideas. They don't have basic literacy skills in order to express those ideas. So there's no way their ideas can make it into an open world. There's no way their ideas can gain traction. Which forces us back to, they need literacy before they can become engaged. And of course, our proposition is, if you're not engaged, you're not going to get the passion for literacy that's going to take you to the basics, let alone transliteracy. So it's somehow dealing with this belief, this notion that knowledge creation is only for the few. Actually, Bodong just defended his thesis a few days ago, and at the center of this, again, was this notion that you can't be serious that young children can generate new knowledge. Like, you can't be serious, but we are serious. And so it's for us to say, what is the model of knowledge creation that can allow us not to have this image always of the Einsteins making massive leaps into society, but turns of mind that are creative and advance what a community is working on. There are new theories of knowledge creation. They're powerful. They're about self-organizing processes. But the old belief system really creates obstacles that are really quite huge for us. And then this notion that the standards are set in advance and best practices are set out there and then to be transferred kind of goes against the brain of communities trying to innovate and create new systems. And so the belief systems that we work against are these. The think tank sessions are really a critical analysis of what we've been able to put together with your advice. Now, it's with your advice, but there are also many things that you've noted as serious problems, and you're going to see them coming up again in the plan. So what we would like to do by the end of these few days is come up with a coherent plan. You will find a draft of that in your in the program. You'll find a section called the Think Tank Sessions, and I'll say a little bit more about that as I go. But really, what we need is a critical mass. We need the people in this team and also the people who are with us, well, not here, but are actually quite willing and actually stunning communities that can be working on this, but we need to pull this together. So that we really are going to spend these sessions on concrete plans with the hope that you will help us get those plans cleared. So there will be 2 think tank sessions. One will be tomorrow morning from 10 to 11:30. And I hope that you will have time tonight or tomorrow morning to read what's in the program, because we've tried to put together where the 4 major components that Carl briefly went over, what we're planning on doing, what the proposed action plan is next. So what we need you to do is rewrite that action plan, endorse that action plan, say, I think this is so crazy, we've got to start over again. I hope not, but of course we're game to do that if we must. What's going to happen for these 2 sessions, Wednesday and Thursday, is that, again, I'll show you a slide. We're hoping that you'll join one of the 4 think tanks minimally. You might want to cycle across some, but we'd like you to commit to at least 1. And then when we meet, we'll break out into those 4 different sections. You'll do your work as is set out in that plan. Then that will give us an hour of kind of contemplating the issues. Then for the last 30 minutes, hopefully you'll have identified somebody who will give a summary. And so we'll hear the 4 summaries. Here's how you change the plans. This is what you think is unworkable. This is what you think will work. And then we'll hear that Wednesday morning, and we'll have a chance to do that again on Thursday. So we'll have 2 cycles. And if by the time I'm finished, it's not clear how we're going to do this, just please ask me questions so we can get this right. Then on Thursday, there's an international panel. What we've tried to do is take each of the, a representative for each of the nations here, because of course if this doesn't work in your context, it's not going to work. So what we need to do is find out what is it that will or will not work in your particular context. The plan will actually be the objects for a new nonprofit. That is what we're envisioning is needing to do this. So Knowledge Building International is our membership organization, and it operates as a membership organization. The new entity will also be a nonprofit entity. Will both work in close synchrony with Knowledge Building International, but it's the proactive, it's the producing the results, it's creating the teams and the actual people who can do the larger initiative which membership organizations cannot well, we've learned that membership organizations do not do that kind of active work. So the new entity is an active working organization. So, as I said, the design community is very diverse. The plan, in a nutshell, is to create joint ventures to extend the range of the possible in education. So the joint ventures will be with these various organizations internationally. Our commitment is, despite the fact it's very expensive, because of course you've got to have the engineers, you've got to coordinate an open source community, you've got to create the professional development, you've got to do the assessment. But it follows naturally that we're committed to available free and open resources for all. So the organization has got to be able to enable that while it enables this research-intensive design and international test bed. What we're talking about is the hubs of innovation internationally. Now, as you'll see, this gets into all kinds of issues, so this is what we need your feedback on. What seems very clear is the contributions for the international team are stunning and can drive this international enterprise. That we have no doubt about. It's how to make things coherent and have enough in it for these international teams that they stay connected and can actually drive the enterprise. So we're envisioning an exchange program. Lots of people will make contributions, and they will in turn benefit from those, so that, say for instance, I just saw Fernando. Fernando has somebody within his team in Colombia who's actually a very great designer, and he helps us. He joins our team meetings, he looks at interface design. If you look at New Knowledge Forum, it's been improved considerably, and he's been very much engaged in doing that work. So that's a substantial contribution. In return, it's not clear how we're going to how much support we could provide, and I'll say more about that. But Baudon has done research in that context, so then we can have somebody writing about that research. We can produce feature articles. We're just about to try to hire, right now it'll be a student journalist, but somebody who can start telling the stories, can start, like if you think about how many teacher inventions have been created in this network, like teachers who can get whole classes of students connected and actively working. And these never get written up as inventions in the world of invention. So why does education not have these teacher inventions written up? So we thought, well, we should actually start writing them up, you know, like imagine teachers who can do these things. But we need those stories and we need them out there. So the BCCI will do this reciprocal support. Now, here's this tricky part. Of course, in order to do all this, we need to hire the people, and we always refer to this enterprise as our $1 million a year problem. Because, in fact, to keep the journalists, to keep the open source technology, to keep the assessments going, that's what it takes on a yearly basis. That's a lot of writing of grants, and we're real tired of writing grants. You write grants, you write progress reports, you have to be responsible for cycles of things. We're starting to think, what if we took the contributions of this stunning community, and we actually said we'll live by our contributions. We can tally those up. We know, Fernando, I'm probably pointing to you again just because it's easy. Here's somebody who's helping produce interface design. We can acknowledge the worth of that to the enterprise. You'll hear this afternoon of work that we're doing with the Ministry of Education in Ontario and the Ontario Principals Council, and out of that is coming new models that are allowing us to create data profiles that we would have never ever seen before. And so we get these kinds of advances that are real and tangible, and support for doing these, and in turn, they are producing webinars. Well, many of you are producing webinars. What if, in fact, we could produce the webinars that actually got the know-how for teachers out in accessible form? And what if we taught courses which people keep asking for, and we actually charged for those courses? So each of you might do a seminar, might do a presentation, we would organize ourselves, we could charge for a lot of knowledge mobilization because we're asked constantly, do workshops, do courses, do various things. So that money would come to our central pool. So it is the resource that we would start using to drive the enterprise. So we would work on contracts, grants. They will always be our first order line of responsibility. But we can also be making financial resources from the things we do that we now just do out of the goodness of our souls. And we will still do a lot out of the goodness of our souls, but we will also create courses, lectures. Therese was just reminding me that the model she was talking about this morning is a just-in-time online resource for teachers. So a teacher can call in any moment and say, I am stuck. Can somebody look at this? Can somebody do this? And we can respond to that. So this system of services amongst ourselves, of course, you would get contributions and benefits. But some people out there, they don't want to contribute. They just would like to pay for a workshop, and we'll say, fine, we'll produce that, and that will go to the central pool. So that's the kind of arrangement we're talking about. And then, of course, contributors, I mean, those people who contribute the most, of course, have to be our priority in how we move. So that's the general idea of how we will proceed. It turns out that this has a lot of implications for how we move as a community. And we've tried to write those out in that think tank sessions. I'm going to highlight a few for you because they really do make a difference to how we're proceeding. So in the table you will see that I hope you will look at before we meet tomorrow. There's one column, the first column, that's here are the design issues and challenges. So that's, you know, pretty straightforward. Those are the issues. The provisional plan is the one that actually sets out how we're going to move and the implications that it has for a lot of us. The next column is related sessions. Every workshop here, every session that is going on is highly relevant to one or another of these four enterprises. So having people move between those workshops and the think tank sessions so that we're really an active working group will be a really important thing. We need you, we would love you to put your name on one of those think tank sessions. They are in the database, and I think you can get into the database here. If you could put your name on one of them, and if one of them has no names and you would volunteer to be on that one, that would be great. When we meet, as I say, there will be these breakouts. You'll talk for a while as a team and then come together. During each breakout session, you'll have to identify one person to give us a summary statement at the end of that. When you go into the database, you'll actually see think tank on professional development, think tank on knowledge building hubs of innovation, think tank on open source software and assessment, and the final one that doesn't show here is the research repositories and teacher stories, teacher innovations and student discoveries. So that's the structure of what's in the database. This, in very simplified form, is what you'll see in your handout. So now if you just take professional development and knowledge mobilization, that's one of the four think tanks. On the left, design issues and challenges. I've shortened these. What I'm focusing on in this presentation are the particularly contentious parts of this, because I want to highlight these for you so that you deal with these when you're in your sessions. So we intend to create and refine principle-based knowledge building know-how, know-why. It actually means that if we live by what we put out to the world, we should be able to create a resource that has continually advancing resources and design iterations rather than static examples. And it's really hard to find this on the web. You know, normally, here's an example of what you do. That example is out there, and that's how you do it. But of course, we're a community that does continual design iterations and improvements, so we need those growing accounts of what's possible in our examples. Now, I've told you, so the idea is that we would actually create income through professional development and knowledge mobilization. We're actually imagining, this is going to be another big one for you to discuss, that we would provide credentials for teachers, administrators, and service providers wishing to take leadership roles in knowledge building, knowledge creation. So, of course, none of us then are credentialed. And how would we get our credentials? And how would, presumably, teachers would need to be able to continue to be able to create advances. Administrators would need to be able to support groups of teachers who are willing to take the risks and do this kind of work. So it's a huge issue for us, and again, you'll see more details in the program. But this notion that we would provide credentials, now of course anybody can provide support anytime they want, but we would hopefully be the group that was actually being able to make enough progress that credentialing would mean something, mean something substantial. So you'll also see in the list what are the team challenges. I'm just highlighting some of the issues there. I want to give this a little bit of punch by saying what happened when we went into this year, the ministry initiative that had us working with the Ontario Principals Council and the Dr. Jackman Institute of Child Study. Now, we worked with the Institute of Child Study for many, many, many years. And the book, Natural Curiosity, which is written about the power of students' ideas, what's possible, I think, is just really spread, and it's created a real resource that's considered very powerful. The ministry itself, and people here should correct me if I'm saying anything wrong, but they have actually, Bouchard's the director of the Literacy and Numeracy Secretariat, so if somebody can correct me, Bruce will correct me. But this notion of improving literacy and numeracy, one of the things I believe has created Ontario's ability to be among the rare places in the world that has been able to stay on a continual improvement trajectory. So people look for where are the places in the world where you actually get increasing advances year after year. Well, Ontario is one of those places, and it's been very supportive of inquiry-based learning. So now we're talking about knowledge creation, and of course the buzz for all of us is, wait, is that the same as inquiry-based learning? Is it different? What's the difference? How does that work? So professional development, of course, has just taken this issue, and it's become a really dominant piece that we're really needing to put a framework on. The Ontario Principals Councils, which is completely new to us in our experience, coordinate principals from across the province. So it's the first time we have witnessed what happens when you have principals actually engaged in talking about, is this what we want for our school? And if we've been doing inquiry learning, how's knowledge creation relate to that? And just looking at Sanji, the National Institute of Education in Singapore has just put together a book trying to deal with this issue about knowledge creation in education. What's it look like? Where should it be headed? And so this need to go forward, one of the things that that knowledge creation people argue is that natural curiosity is actually the easy part. Like, you get kids' ideas and they're incentive and they're great ideas. But you gotta live through a lot of different people's ideas and coordinate those. And as Carl says, explanatory coherence. And sometimes you have to keep them on a sustained trajectory. So that part, that is the hard part, is also something you have to do. So, this is just this year. Just in the last months, we start seeing all of these models of inquiry learning that these teachers have. So many teachers have different models. They tend to be marked by a kind of a model that tends to have a circle of moving around and doing an inquiry process. Many of them end up being the same. The inquiry process is set out in some of these mandates. Pose real questions, find resources, interpret information. You can see these models. Now, I'm giving you this example because one teacher told me this story of implementing inquiry learning, and this was really helpful for me. So the teacher's implementing inquiry learning, is very fluent with these models, has a problem that's called an authentic problem. So it's set out for the students, and the students are working in mathematics, and you can see the problem. Decides to use knowledge form because that will be really helpful for inquiry. The teacher is experiencing a kind of pleasure that the students have each come up with an answer to the question. My heart is beating very fast because what I see is not the students' answers. What I see is no connectedness amongst the students. What I see is when I read the notes, they all pretty much have the same answer. So why would you want to become a community and be engaged when I have to read the same question, the answer 30 times? Many of them have, their problems, their answers don't make a lot of sense to me, but nobody questions that. Nobody tries to explore what's happening. So, as I say, I'm kind of thunderstruck. Wow, the general sense is, great, we've got inquiry going. So this is kind of, wow, what do we mean by inquiry? And how does that indeed relate to knowledge creation? And how are we going to evolve these models? But the other part that's kind of exciting is this press to evolve new models, which I actually think this community is going to be rather stunning at doing. One thing that I really saw that I hadn't seen before was this question-answer, question-answer. Every child has a question, every child answers their question. A couple of times a student has a second question and an answer, but you don't see a dovetailing of their different answers and an issue about how to proceed. Yoshiaki from Japan has been with us, and he's been just marvelously helpful. And he actually worked with this, with the advisor, a researcher who was working with this teacher. What he did, which was very interesting, was say, okay, I'd like to find out if I can get any big picture of what the students are doing. So here are the dimensions I care about. I care about mathematical operations. So the question from an analytic point of view is, well, what are the concepts that would tell you that the students have mathematical operations? Teacher said add, subtract, multiply, divide. Are they asking questions? Are they dealing with linear proportional reasoning? Again, these are teacher-generated words that the students would be using to demonstrate this. And are they engaged in discussion related? So again, to look at this is to tell us we have a shallow discourse. We do not have much of this activity going on any one of those dimensions. Now, of course, for us, the good news is when we have student discourse, we can see these things. It's very interesting that we're seeing very different things because we're data analysis, knowledge creation eye on this. So, but nonetheless, we can see these different things, and what this has started to do is create for us what I would say is a potential breakthrough. I don't know if you would call it that, but I really want to try to present it in terms of what it means when you're engaged in these communities collectively. So the dimensions that are coming out are this distinction between lots of things that are called inquiry, but actually question answer is very different from progressive uncovering of deeper issues. Research that's designed to confirm a belief you already have is really different from iterative design and development, where you go deeper into unexpected places. References, using single source, either something people gave you or Googling an answer and finding the answer, getting the answer in a single source is really different from the translator world of mining multiple resources. Stop where you need to go. Well-defined problems, the problems that we're seeing were considered authentic problems, but in fact they're well-defined problems, and the students know, the teacher knows the answer, and their job is to get to that answer. That's very different from knowledge creation, where the space is well-defined and you need to be in an open space. Regulatory functions, it's very clear when the people have so much time to answer a question, and then when that answer is in, the next question is asked. What we've learned from previous research is students know very well if they have 2 days to answer a question, they're going to ask you a question that's answerable in 2 days. If they have 5 months to answer a question, they're going to open a more, do more open questions. They're very sensitive to these dimensions. Anyhow, I'm not going to go through this. What I wanted to say in terms of the think tank that's really important, if you take these dimensions that just in these last months we're starting to uncover these collaborative professional development initiatives that we're in, we actually have analytic tools, and when you go to the sessions this week, you're going to see everyone that I'm pointing to here, and you're going to see a lot more. This notion that we could build the analytic tools that would allow us to get to a model of how do you get from inquiry learning in its more miniaturized form to the forms of inquiry that underlie knowledge creation. That would be a big breakthrough. It would be a big breakthrough on a large scale. The notion that we have analytic tools that could actually help us get to these breakthroughs is pretty exciting. So you can see the list there. I'm going to give you a couple of visual images of how these work and mention the people who will be talking about these in this forum. This notion you can quickly see if you have student discourse, which is why we care so passionately about an environment that is the intellectual space students put their ideas. Because when we have their ideas, we can do any of these kinds of analytic tools. So we can see when there are only 2 resources that the students are rallied around and there's no building on. And these are thanks to Dawn, where note reading is a very interconnected process, and we have substantial building on. Well, Dawn and Monica have been working with this notion of hive plots, where you literally can take, here's the curriculum, which is one axis, here's student discourse in their face-to-face conversations, that's another axis, here's student discourse online. How much connectedness is there? How much reading is there? How much interconnectedness is there? So you can quickly see in the semantic spaces whether students are growing or not and creating an interconnected community. This notion of individual inquiry to collective responsibility of community knowledge. Chun-Wei will be actually presenting work from a National Science Foundation project that he has secured that actually is taking, if you take the idea threads, how deep do those idea threads go? How connected are those threads? You can actually start determining whether you have an interconnected community going deeper into ideas, and John will tell us more about that. What he can show is that if you have these, what we might call meta-discourse tools, here's the discourse. If you can get a bigger picture on the discourse, you and the students can get a much larger sense of what they're doing. Now, this has been just demonstrated 4 times that I'm aware of. Wang Yao in Taiwan did it with using keywords. Monica did it with using how scaffolds give a big picture of what discourse types students are using. Bodong did it with promising ideas. What are the big pictures of where the promising ideas are? And many of you might, I think the lexical analysis developed here in Quebec does this too. Here's all the discourse. Here's the big overlay of the lay of the land. As students see that, they start another iteration of work. They see a bigger picture of where they're going. So that's really turning out to be very important for driving this. The last thing that I will mention, I mentioned these breakthroughs from these close partnerships because I think it's so essential that in our new plans we create these and we create them internationally so that this kind of vibrancy is happening not just within groups, but this morning you hear what's happening in the remote network schools. Here's this work happening in Ontario. We need to learn from one another. I've just been hearing about the work that's been going on in Singapore and the Wish missions. And I think everybody who's here can tell us something. It's just that those aren't speaking to each other in a way that we can take the best of these inventions. Light up the curriculum is this notion that we can now take the semantic spaces of students. This was done for work in Chile, but when you have their notes, you can say where on the curriculum are they advancing. What typically happens if they're studying optics, you find out, are they doing well in optics? This takes a very different slant. It says, they're not only doing well in optics, but they're working on cycles, they're working on communication, they're working on digital literacy. So once we as a community can start showing that if we don't treat the curriculum as this narrow one-to-one, this is what they do in the classroom, this is the curriculum, but you can show the great expanse of their ideas across the curriculum, then we stand a much better chance of breaking down this notion that knowledge building takes too long. It's too slow and it's too hard. Well, actually, it picks up great speed and it does really get you the advances when you can look at a broader level. Hubs of innovation, the most contentious issue here, I think, is that we need to continually improve, and teachers, not just students, we talk about students' ideas improving, but teachers' ideas need to improve. Now, I'm going to show you, I've sworn I'll never show these graphs again because we've showed them so many times that they're boring. And so you can groan. But I'm showing them because they remain the only example we have in 20 years. That's the sad part of our story. And if one of you has another example, so we can toss away what Richard Messina did and have a better example, we will be delighted to do this. And it's what I mean about progressive community. So this notion that a teacher, to be credentialed, should be able to do what Richard Messina was doing. I have to say, though, if Jean-Wei, a postdoc, had not studied what Richard Messina was doing, we never would have seen what Richard was doing, nor would Richard have seen what Richard was doing from this perspective. If we had not had connectedness to a research lab that had graduate students who could mine massive data, none of us would know this story. It actually did not I think this is fair, Richard. It did not come from you. Richard was just trying to teach better for 3 years. And so this notion about us needing to be able as a community to bring this power of connected researchers, connected analytic tools, connected engineers, connected policymakers together is one of the big stories. Now this is saying, for the Hub of Innovation, probably the most contentious issue here is that teachers would actually be credentialed on, for Hub of Innovation on yearly measurable advances in principal practice mirrored by advances in achievement. Now, you might think that's too hard. I give you Richard's example because, as I say, if it's the only one we've had in 20 years, then is it that no other teacher can do this? Is it no other teacher should? This is a big issue, and I hope you'll grapple with this in the think tank. The document that you'll find is called Hubs of Innovation, where education for innovation becomes a reality, and it's in your, I keep saying I'm going to show you the slides, but I seem to have embedded them deep here. So this is our overused, never replicated example. Can we make such progress possible? So I think you've all seen this. Richard, surprisingly, was at the center of discourses. He had small groups working in specialized teams. The second year, he had more interaction between his students. It took him to the third year of trying to get his students to advance to show what in the literature, the knowledge creation literature, is called a distributed opportunistic network. In such networks, every player, every teacher is taking a powerful role in advancing the work. And that is knowledge creation. That we have not seen in other databases. So there's no doubt it's hard, it's rare. Is it, however, something we should be making more commonplace? By all of our belief system, it should. It's what knowledge creation is about. It's how those teams operate. Now it should be easier because we know what a network looks like. We can find out if that's not the network that we have. Of course, what we also have to do, in what Junwei and Ching did in their analysis, is find out not only is the social group different every year, but student achievement went up every year. So student practices were mirrored in advances in student achievement. Now, it seems to be knowledge-building professional development, if it can't do that, has a serious problem on its hands. If a teacher can't improve consistently, mirrored in student achievement, it has a serious problem. Now, you can argue against me, but the proposition put out in the package you're going to be dealing with is that we should be able to create this kind of phenomenon, and this should not be rare. Okay, that's the challenge for the Hubs of Innovation group. The challenge for the open source software and assessment, just to bring to focus the big issues here, we need an environment that mirrors open innovation, knowledge creation. We need analytic tools that sustain this. You will find we've done some things in how we plan to proceed. We plan that we will develop on the basis of priorities, typically defined by grants and subcontracts. But what we will use our very first group money for is to hire somebody who can take advantage of the international open source community. So if you think, here we are a community, we have power like we've never been able to tap in distant communities, but we can't tap that until we have management of the resources and who's developing what. And a teacher can put a request out and ask for something, and somebody can respond to that request. It's one thing to have open source agreement. It's another thing to have an active community that can help keep driving these advances. The group here is charged with getting us that. It's also charged with accepting the public license that we're planning on. the lesser general public license. Those of you who are into software licenses will know and might have some thoughts about whether that's the license we should use or not. But this team is charged with that. It's also charged with trying to figure out what are the analytic tools that are going to move us the most in this next round. And you'll also see in the related sessions a lot of workshops on this. Carl mentioned Alan Liu, transliteracy proponent. Here's his, this is not a book. What he's referring to is the fact that information in the information world is in these fragments, in these pieces. You won't, I see this and I see a knowledge forum view. It's working across these kinds of knowledge spaces and how to get to higher level views. If you do this analysis, which we've done with Alan Liu, he considers working in these complex spaces of knowledge forum is precisely transliteracy. That is, it involves complex configurations, it involves information beyond given resources, it involves all of this. So you must live a transliterate world to live in these kinds of environments. What we're envisioning, and we hope this team will help us, not just these straightforward open source issues, but the designs for how are we going to create these more powerful environments. Here's an envisionment that says, what if you took the space of the view and you created a layer on it and you could actually visualize Rise Above. So Rise Above became a real function that students saw, not just something we talked about. Would that get us the more power we need? What if we could have that happening but across communities? So if your community in Japan is dealing with an issue that's being dealt with someplace else, you could come together in a more holistic way. The final challenge of the think tank session is we're literally imagining that from our partners, from the distributed teams, now I know again this is a scary one, but we would create anonymized systems so that data could go directly from your databases, from any database, into a central repository. It would be anonymized. It would be anonymized at the student level. It would be anonymized at the school level. It would be anonymized at the organization level. But the power that comes from internet-connected researchers, the fact that many of us are university professors and have so many students wanting to do degrees and could actually study knowledge bases. A teacher could partner with a researcher and find out things they could never find out on their own. Once we find those things out as we're discovering about inquiry, we as a team can work and tackle these problems. We could then solve these problems on a large scale, but without the data, we can't drive this. So the idea is that we would create these central repositories, that another potentially scary idea is our news, our research would come from the schools that actually contributed their resources. So now it's very happenstance. We hardly know. We find an example here, we find an example there. Here, teachers would know as part of the community, they need to put these examples here. That's where journalists will be focusing. That's where the research community will be focusing. We will grow that. Again, potentially you hate the idea or you like the idea, but we need the idea improved. So those are the think tanks. You can see why we need you. These are a lot of big issues. And as I say, what we hope to do is leave here with your input and then write the objects of a new association or do whatever else you suggest for your input. So I've talked a long time. I don't know if there are any quick questions, but I really wanted to give you a big picture because this is kind of super important to next steps.
I have 30 more minutes to go. I have 30 more minutes to go. Welcome to that. Well, let me just talk.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to talk. It would be wonderful if we had ideas like, you know, either not understanding how this is going to work or any questions or issues would be wonderful.
the Richard Messina example, which is never boring, we love it. One of the things, that's a data analysis of the teacher, but a lot of the work that I've done in the classroom, the teachers aren't involved in the database, but they're not making notes. They're obviously very active using the database, but there's not notes that show up in such an analysis. So can you speak to that in terms of credentialing?
Yeah, we actually can do the same with video. It's more expensive, of course, because we've got to get it in digital form so that we can do the analyses, which of course raises the issue about, but do we always want to work with digitized data? The power of the analytic tools, I can't help but believe, is going to open us spaces. I mean, I think when you go to these workshops and you see these different analytic tools, education has just simply never had a resource like this, and it happens to be a unique blessing of this community that we have some of the strongest learning analytic people in the world working with us. I should mention the folks from Smith College, I don't know if you're going to talk about the dashboard, but I think it's a really important issue to bring into these. Okay, back to your issue. If people in the community don't have a sense that they need to get the story told, then they're not part of a knowledge building and design community. I'm saying this in stark terms because I think you've got to feel that you want your data, you want your examples, you want your stories part of an extended community. So if somebody told a story the way you tell stories, Kate, those stories would, of course, we would need them linked to your website, or we would need something about the Ideas First project. Then we would also hope that we would get data of some sort, be it video data, stories without, Glenn, I don't know if you're going to talk to us about the NSF work that you're doing with stories, but there's a lot that can happen with powerful stories. So this wasn't saying just database entries. On the other hand, you know, the reason for a database is we believe in a community resource that extends people's ideas beyond the classroom. So we've got to get them those ideas and students building on each other's ideas. So we would like to do it both ways, Kate, is the point. And yeah, I think if the teacher could give a case study, if the teacher could give an example, it would not, the research basis will probably always depend on can we make the advances in literacy, numeracy, the subject area going deep. I think we have to have that kind of data or we will never make it. But the powerful examples would always be a part of that. Is the thought.
I wondered if you could comment on how your comments to us, and thank you so much, relate to Teresa's first slide, where we were looking at a potentially shared object. And I'm just wondering if you could comment on how you see the lines coming from teachers and schools and classrooms and universities and researchers of that potentially shared object. Exactly where would we see that intersection out of what you're proposing in terms of credentialing and in terms of some of the things in conversation?
Yeah, but it's really hard, Elizabeth, because we're so spoiled by working closely with you, that our model is that we have a close personal relationship with the site where the work is happening, and the stories are told as we talk and meet with each other. And we then have graduate students and the work I told you that Joy did, where we dive into your databases and discover things. So we have both the stories and the deep part. What's become, of course, evident to us is this is dreamland. You know, this isn't a scalable, large enterprise that we can do. So I would love other people to talk to this more than me, because I know in Singapore there are really numbers of classrooms. I know actually, I think in New Zealand, and I'd like to know how you see this. I guess all I could say is, Elizabeth, is trying to take the strength of those points, being able to get into the database, where now we broker everything. People say, oh, we would like to see, actually, somebody wanted to write an NSF grant and wrote to me and said, I can't find knowledge building discourse on the web. I have studied ThinkQuest, I have studied 1,000 Facebook pages, I have studied and just laid out. I can't find deep sustained inquiry, so would you let us study a site, a knowledge building site? Well, how do you do that? You have to contact everybody you know, try to figure out where might they be able to get that personal agreement. This would say, if you would allow anonymized data to come in, you would always, if in fact we start saying, oh, we found really sustained discourse here, then of course you would see the marker of somebody who identified sustained discourse in grade 3 that is exceptional. You hopefully would be notified that actually a researcher has found this result in your context. You could choose to say, hey, that's us. Or you could choose to leave it be anonymous, but we would have a resource where we would have not individual people trying to broker something of this complexity, but a brokerage house. Well, the Child Assessment Database in Carnegie Mellon University is the best example I know. Everybody doing child development work knows if they have data on child development and put it in that database, that's going to be an open database that many people can study. Out of that central repository has come amazingly more journal articles than out of other contexts. Like, it just lifts a community of child development into a new space. They have data they could never see before. And I guess in this community, we have the world's finest resource for knowledge creation and education. We just have it in bits and pieces and fragments that we have to keep brokering individual. So this is trying to figure out what if we as a community could define a system of interaction we trusted, which is really the charge of that third group. What would that look like? So it's not an answer, it's bringing more of a focus to the question.
Let me add something to that. You know, I think it would be very sad to be bypassed by other research communities, given what we have been working on for the past 15, 20 years. It speaks a lot to the private teacher. Remember, Margaret Weir talking about that a lot, you know, and this whole issue of the private teacher. I think if you can see your ways for anonymity at all levels, at the teacher level, at the school level, at the site level, even at the country level, you know, to create that database and to start looking at the big picture, I think that would be quite something. So there is a kind of a passage obligé, you know, from one track to move in that direction. I think it's a very organizational question. It's very important to raise it, and something. Let's try to focus jobs with that.
Yeah, thanks. You know, there might be more distributed, opportunistic social networks in our spaces. We just don't know about them. You know, there's no way to get to a big data analysis of knowledge creation and education. And I actually don't think it's going to be a driving force without it. So I think that's too, is opening the space of saying, how do we do it, and how do we do it with enough protection for individuals, for groups, that they feel comfortable. I should also say, it was actually the professor in Kashan where they do the most amazing anonymization of data resources ever. So this is a contribution of a team that is brilliant. So if you can imagine what that contribution would be to our community, that's another example of the kind of contributions we could bring to this enterprise. And no, other people had questions.
I was just going to comment on Kate's example of keeping up in the present database. Actually, I think that's fairly easy to solve. The teacher presents a narrative explaining what they did and how they did it, and how it built improved over a period of months or years. There should be data that we can analyze and support that. So as long as the your narrative can be triangulated, it shouldn't be a problem.
I get that. I have an idea. Suppose we develop knowledge building in a way that when the teacher presents a note in front, a note from a kid or from a subgroup, that he will, as long as there will be knowledge from it, will be recorded automatically. You can build a mic in there, a digital mic, I don't know. Okay? So that when the teacher talks with the classroom about something, it's being recorded and then put back in writing. Let's use Siri.
Yeah, no, I actually, I've also, I don't know in your context, but I know that in the student child study, you'll see teachers take notes, and they frequently, I mean, I remember somebody from Italy working in your school said, oh, I could automatically send those notes into the database. We've never done anything, but it's that kind of design thinking that says, whatever's missing from the plans you see, if we could get them in there, we could solve them. The issue is how to create the database. The other thing is, policymakers, I think they're all really pleased. What they're always worried about is knowledge creation is not going to get us advances on the international test. It remains that every ounce of data we have says kids, the more work they do with ideas, the better they do on those tests. And we don't have one counter bit of evidence, but 5 little pieces of evidence don't change policymakers' minds. Until we can work on a larger scale, I don't think we're ever going to get over the fear. It takes too long. It's too slow. We've got to get across the curriculum. And I think we're saying, hey, we actually have the technology to show we are going across the curriculum. Different pace, different way. But we're doing that. We're doing fine by international tests. Chile is actually very interesting. Imagine here's a nation willing to say to us, okay, you monitor those results in literacy. If you can get students engaged in deep knowledge engagement and our literacy scores go up, that will make it to our policymakers. Well, that, for all of us, I think is a stunning challenge. Can we do it? And can we do it in our own sites? And can it transfer to other sites? So that's it's a new way of thinking about how we organize ourselves. The sheer function. Oh, yeah.
Oh, this was a question about the new knowledge forum will be under GNU license, is it correct?
Yeah, unless somebody says absolutely want a different license, that's the plan.
So that will be possible for some other institution or other organization to use this system knowledge forum. In that context, how do you see interconnectedness between those databases? You see them as automatic? You see them as necessary to improve? Who decides to be in charge?
Yeah, that's part of the think tank issue about from an open source community. What happens when you get 500 new pieces added on, but we have no research data to support the fact that any of those 500 new pieces actually are getting us better results. How will we do that? Also, how would we even organize the open source community is really... You went? Yes. Great. Yes, because I started looking at management of open source networks, but that's a complex issue all in its own right. So that's marvelous. I think for us, we've always come back to this. We're a research-based community. So if these wonderful, marvelous things aren't getting us advances in results, we would not put it into the broadly distributed environment that we as a community support. That's our starting plan, that we need the research basis for the advances that are part of the environment that we distribute.
I have a question. Actually, I think the complexity of the licensing issue stems from the fact that there are like the new licenses for like the source code itself, but we also need as a community agreements on licensing the data. So we have maybe to find a new type of license for this kind of enterprise.
Yeah, yeah. What do they call it? The Creative Commons?
Yeah.
Yeah. We've been thinking that we would operate under the Creative Commons for the stories, Kate, so that a lot of when I say stories, I talk about teachers reporting what they're doing, struggles they had, pieces that are, I don't need to minimize them because they're not online data. They're incredibly important, but they're of a different order. Like we need to get ethics to have them be able to present those, and we need to get a Creative Commons. And the notion that our resources, that examples themselves would grow, or a teacher would comment on something and say, oh, I tried that and it didn't work. And then there would be some sense about, oh, I see, we should explain that this is like this, that the piece that unfolds from that then would be co-authored by this. So creative license is the Creative Commons license is the best I know of so far, but it's yet another big issue.
But another part of the game-changing aspect of the analytical tools is the fact that the teachers themselves become researchers armed with these tools. And if they can like share their research point of view as a practitioner with the other researchers in an anonymized fashion, that is a game changer. That is revolution right there.
Well, you know, so stick with that a second, because I so agree. This scary thing of I can't improve. But a teacher's, I got more students engaged. Like, you know, runs the analytic tool, see they get, well, we need to know how they do that. You know, the teacher as a researcher, but I don't know if you know, but these tools now are getting so sophisticated, we can turn them over to students. So the students can say, hey, I don't think, like we could, instead of having these fragmented, ugly research results that we have now, we could have ones where the students could say, hey, we're not coming together as a community. Nobody's commenting on anybody's notes. So the tools can be turned over to the students, to the teachers. How do we get that energy that you're talking about? Because you're right, it's a game changer, and it's another thing that makes me think we could be stunning. You know, it could be amazing, because we actually are turning the tools over to teachers and students. But what gets that energy? What gets people? What gets the teachers and students to know about? And I think we just need a couple stories of that, and we will start to get on the way with what you're talking about.
A lot of that happens in our teachers' learning communities, PLCs, and also the principal learning communities. But like we said, sometimes it's in silos, like in the school. Within the school, shared a little bit with the school board, but not to a larger audience. And in the different way of just speaking or sharing. There's other ways of being present in the community faster and having a constant interaction between the teachers, principals, other schools, and the whole community. Mm-hmm. I think that's where we have to go, absolutely, because sometimes the teachers feel alone. It could be a small group of teachers working very hard in the school to implement something like that. If they really believe in it, and they have a counterparty that's trying to stop it, and they lose enthusiasm or motivation because not the whole school is involved in it. So they need somebody outside of that school to relate to. Yeah. So I think it's one of the things that really have. That's why I'm going to put the professional development and teachers, because I think that's one of the key. And so one of the things that we should look at for to have something really get bigger and better and out there.
Yeah, I do think this issue about, I was in one of your meetings that kind of knocked me out where I think it was actually the superintendent said, listen, I have a subset of teachers interested in doing this, the rest, absolutely no. So that feels to me okay. I would love to figure out how to take the teachers who are interested and create a conversation around that. And I thought, that's an administrator wisdom that's really very interesting. Sure, I have some people, yes, no, but how do I create a conversation that enables this? I think you're adding another piece that if we as a community were in on that, I can assure you for the teachers who wanted to try, we would be checking out those research results, we would be writing those stories, we would be creating some energy that says, hey, this is powerful, so that when that conversation happens, they're looking, wow, you have all those researchers working with you, you have somebody built a tool for you, you have, hey, this is a helpful community, which is going to shift the discourse in that game-changing way you're talking about. But of course, without that professional development, so I'm delighted you're going to be on that team, because how do you create that? And the administrative support that enables the conversations to happen at the administrative level. No.
Marlene, during the break, I had the opportunity to speak with Therese, and we were talking about what's happening and the agencies really in the co-design piece, and students being responsible for their learning. And we were talking about the resource that we're working on, that we'll talk a little bit more about this afternoon. And how do you give over that design to students? Because many times, when you start to really analyze what's going on, what we think as teachers or adults is going on isn't actually going on at all with the kids. And how do we get to what is it that the students are thinking about, and how can they tell us their story as opposed to us layering into saying we think this is what's happening. So last week Bruce and I had an opportunity to chat about it with Dennis, and we were in a meeting looking at where do we need to go in terms of our next iteration to contribute to the database that we're creating. And we would like to have anyone's feedback this afternoon on that as we move forward. So thanks very much, Chris, this morning for talking about those issues around the co-design, the issues that get us thinking about the dichotomy. And you have to have those tensions there. If we don't have the tensions, we don't have that really good thinking. And now I think we're at the point where we can say honestly in an open environment that there are things we don't know and there are things we want to try, and we need to go out there and figure it out. But we can't be the ones that are in charge of figuring out everything for kids. That's what it was beautiful this morning to see, because what we're going to learn from the kids this week will help inform us as to how we approach our students and understand their thinking.
You remind me of one of the tri-board research meetings we had where of this ministry work that's going on with the Ontario Principals Council. The three boards are actually running their own research on the work that we're doing. So one of the researchers said, well, I was actually asking the students why they used knowledge form or didn't use knowledge form. And the student said, oh, I didn't use it because it's boring. And I thought, wow, would I love to talk to that child. Like, what would not be boring? And exactly this notion, if we get kids to help co-design, they're going to lift our interface designs beyond what you can believe. So this is just reinforcing this notion that you get kids saying boring, and then you kind of, so could you make idea advancement not boring? And what would that look like? And having kids help us co-design, of course, would be great fun. But then also the story is that we're a community that actually takes kids real seriously, and probably they'll come up with better designs than we would have anyway.
And we need schools that believe that kids can co-design.
No.
Right. If you don't have the schools, exactly, don't have the schools, the teachers, principals, administration that believe in it, it's not going to work. There's some passionate believers that are really into it, ready to put some time and to put some thinking, a lot of thinking, and there's so many things kids can do, and we don't know about it, they don't listen.
I'm just wondering if people, I've never worked with principals councils before. So what's evident to me, which is completely new, is that when you have administrators in the discourse, it's a different level of activity altogether. So the kind of conversation of what you're saying. Now, I'm wondering from other nations, I happen to be looking at you, Julie, but anywhere, do you work at these multiple levels with, yes. And how do you keep these networks together at all of these multiple levels? Policymakers, administrators, students, teachers. What do you do?
Lots of meetings.
Lots of meetings.
We've tried doing lots of online things, but mostly get people together in the same room a lot. Once a month, once every 2 or 3 weeks, and have principals and teachers and students, and just put them in the same room and get them to talk.
Could you imagine scaling it internationally? Like, how do we get what's happening in these different places talked about across our places? Another meeting.
I was thinking leverage technology and things like the discussion platform we use for Teresa's project, the Knowledge Building International project, and have video conferences. I feel, at least from my point of view, students, teachers, and principals do want to connect. We just have to give them an easy way to do it that they feel is significant, that they can bring in their knowledge and that they're heard. I was just thinking about students as co-designers. If students knew that they could give you feedback on the software, they would. We asked students and they gave us so much feedback, it was just overwhelming.
See, I would love to have that feedback onto our open source development site where this team of engineers could say, oh, they want this, oh, they want that, oh, I have an idea. So then a student has an engineer come back with this feedback. So once you start taking it seriously enough, and I actually think many an engineer that we know would love to make education go better. They'd be very proud that something was taken up. So that's what seems to be, like we've even been imagining a course where, say, from each nation, a policymaker would do a seminar. And that would be the contribution. Like that, there would actually be an administrator's course. And that well, anyhow, I don't have anything more detailed than that, but it's interesting that that's going on. And like, Julie, I don't know why Hong Kong folks got in touch with you, so there became a Singapore Hong Kong node. Is there any insightful piece in that we should?
Yeah, just before the Hong Kong one, we also ran a series of leadership in education technology program for all the principals in Singapore. So it is a once-a-year thing, but we break down into different modules. Part of it is they visit knowledge building classroom and figure out. But one of the concepts is also getting the principals to be connected principals. So we get them to create Google Class communities so they share different information. But it is because then they get themselves to come up and share their journey as a connected leader, and then they inspire others to expose. Then they get connected to international and so on with webinar. So one of the concepts in that form module we run that you got to be a connected person, and that kind of Yeah, and then back to the Hong Kong piece, I think that we haven't really looked into scaling that the kind of connection that we have with Hong Kong. I think it was at that point, it was quite uniquely, we have a group of knowledge building teachers. In terms of physical proximity, Hong Kong is the nearest. We have a group of knowledge building teachers, so we just decided to connect. And the good thing that came out from it is we continue to connect over video conferencing a couple of times as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel the getting together physically helps very much. So if we could put together a principals institute and a teachers institute where they could come to Ottawa or come to Quebec and interact with the community and get a 3-4 day course that would start those connections. I feel that's important.
So a separate principals institute, a separate.
Yeah.
Yes.
I would think of it.
A principals institute, much like we, yeah.
Yeah, and more of a principals curriculum that you could develop in 3-4 days and send them home with an action plan for their school, with a lot of knowledge that they still need to process, but a community that will help them process that. I attended one 2 years ago that at Harvard they run this principal center. And I attended one that was about school buildings. And it was a 3-day thing, very focused. And at the end, you had connected with a lot of people that you could still talk to about those issues. I feel we need something like that for principals and for teachers. Different from this. This is the researchers, this is the designing community, but a principal here would not get so much as we do.
Well, let's go for it. Because I would have I think principals will get a lot today also.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mean.